This is The Seventh Guest Dies at Dawn, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Welcome back to the Little Grey Cells. I'm Arthur Hastings, and thank you for joining me tonight on this journey into the heart of darkness. First, we would like to greatly thank our listeners from Peru and the USA. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to subscribe and write a comment where you are from. Tonight, we enter a house of dread, where 7 strangers have been gathered by a mysterious and unseen host. Dim your lights, Poirot yourself a tisane, and prepare to exercise your own grey cells. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The telegram arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a night when the November wind howled through London's streets and the rain fell in sheets that turned the cobblestones into rivers. It was delivered by a breathless boy who had run through the tempest to reach Poirot's door, his uniform soaked through and his face pale with the urgency of his mission. But it was not the telegram itself that would draw the great detective into this particular web of murder and vengeance. It was what happened 17 minutes later, when the first of 7 strangers appeared on his doorstep, soaking wet and trembling with a terror that seemed to go beyond anything the merely physical could explain. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair plastered to her face by the rain, and eyes wide with a fear that seemed to go far beyond the merely physical. Her clothes, though well made, were dishevelled from her flight through the storm, and her hands shook as she clutched a piece of paper. A paper that Poirot would later recognise as identical to the one he himself had just received from the messenger boy. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, her voice breaking with barely controlled panic. "You must help me. Please, you must. They're going to kill us all." Before Poirot could respond, or even invite the distraught young woman inside, the night delivered another visitor. A man this time, middle-aged and portly, his expensive overcoat utterly ruined by the downpour, and his dignity similarly tattered. He too carried a paper in his trembling hands, and he too wore the expression of someone who had glimpsed their own mortality and found the experience profoundly disturbing. "Is this the detective's residence?" he demanded breathlessly. "I was told to come here. I was told he could save us from whatever nightmare awaits." Within the hour, 5 more had arrived, each bearing the same mysterious summons, each showing the same desperate fear that spoke of terrors beyond ordinary comprehension. 7 strangers, drawn together by identical telegrams that promised answers to questions they had never consciously asked and threatened consequences they could not begin to escape. The telegrams read, "You have been chosen. The 7th guest dies at dawn. Come to 47 Whitmore Gardens at midnight if you wish to learn why you have been selected. Come to Hercule Poirot if you wish to survive the night. The choice is yours, but know that failure to appear will not protect you from what is coming." "Someone has used my name," Poirot observed grimly, examining the papers with growing concern as he compared them to his own summons. "Someone has made me part of their elaborate game without my consent or knowledge." "Then you didn't send for us?" the young woman asked, her voice breaking. "I did not. But I received a summons as well, directing me to this same address, promising that 7 people would die unless I intervened. It seems we have all been manipulated by the same hand." The 7 guests, for so Poirot had begun to think of them in his methodical way, were a curious and disparate assortment of humanity. The young woman was Miss Helena Crane, a secretary at a London publishing house who seemed too ordinary for such extraordinary circumstances. The portly man was Mr. Herbert Blackwood, a successful businessman who dealt in imports from the far corners of the empire and who clearly valued his comfort above most other considerations. There was also Dr. James Whitfield, a physician with a nervous manner that suggested either professional anxiety or a guilty conscience. Mrs. Constance Aldridge, a wealthy widow in her 60s, whose aristocratic bearing could not entirely conceal the fear that had brought her here. Captain Richard Sterling, a retired military officer with a rigid bearing that spoke of decades of service to crown and country. Miss Vera Templeton, a pale, quiet woman who worked as a governess and who seemed to fade into the wallpaper whenever attention shifted away from her. And finally, Mr. Simon Fletcher, a young solicitor with sharp eyes, a sharper tongue, and the confident manner of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room he entered. 7 people who claimed, each one of them, to have never met any of the others before this storm-swept night, yet who had all received the same threatening message summoning them to their doom. The address mentioned in these telegrams, 47 Whitmore Gardens. Do any of you recognize it? Poirot asked, his grey cells already beginning to engage with the puzzle that had so unexpectedly presented itself. Does this location hold any significance for any of you gathered here tonight? The reactions around the room were immediately telling to the detective's practiced eye. Most of the 7 shook their heads, their expressions showing what appeared to be genuine puzzlement and confusion. But 3 of them, Dr. Whitfield, Mrs. Aldridge, and Captain Sterling, showed something else entirely. A flicker of recognition quickly suppressed, a tightening of facial features that suggested secrets not yet ready to be revealed. A momentary flash of fear that spoke of buried history. The house belonged to Marcus Thornwood, Captain Sterling said, finally, his military bearing cracking slightly under the weight of whatever memories the name evoked. He died there 7 years ago to this very month, under circumstances that were never fully explained to the satisfaction of those who knew him. Or knew of him, I should say. You knew this man, Thornwood? You were acquainted with him personally? I knew of him, as did most people who moved in certain circles during those years. Everyone in those particular social and business spheres knew of Marcus Thornwood. He was notorious, would be the most accurate word to describe his reputation. Notorious for what? Specific activities or behaviours? The silence that followed the question was heavy with unspoken history and barely concealed dread. Finally, Mrs. Aldridge spoke, her aristocratic voice barely above a whisper that seemed to come from somewhere far away. Marcus Thornwood collected people, Monsieur Poirot. He collected their secrets, their shames, their hidden sins and private indiscretions. And then he used what he collected to destroy them, or to extract whatever he wanted from them in exchange for his continued silence. Chapter 2. The House of Shadows. The rain had not lessened in the slightest when Poirot and his 7 charges arrived at 47 Whitmore Gardens in the dead of night. The house loomed before them in the darkness, a Victorian pile of considerable size that seemed to absorb the shadows rather than merely existing within them, its windows dark and empty, like the eye sockets of a skull. No lights showed in any window, no smoke rose from any chimney. Yet the front door stood slightly ajar, as if expecting their arrival with patient and malevolent anticipation. "We should not go in," Miss Templeton said, her quiet voice carrying unexpected conviction that made the others pause. "This is a trap. We all know it's a trap, and we are walking into it willingly, like lambs to the slaughter." "And yet we have no choice but to proceed," Mr. Fletcher observed, with the pragmatic tone of a solicitor accustomed to unpleasant necessities. "Whoever sent those telegrams knows who we are, knows where we live, knows things about us that no stranger should possibly know. If we run, they will find us wherever we hide. Our only hope is to confront this threat directly and discover what we are truly facing." "The young solicitor speaks sense," Poirot agreed, though his own misgivings were considerable. "But we will not walk blindly into danger, like fools stumbling through fog. I have already contacted Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard before we departed. He will follow within the hour, with officers sufficient to secure the premises and protect us from whatever threats may await. Our task is to discover what awaits us inside, and to survive until help arrives. Nothing more, nothing less." The interior of 47 Whitmore Gardens was as unwelcoming as its exterior had promised. Dust sheets covered the furniture like shrouds over corpses. Cobwebs adorned the chandeliers in delicate grey lacework, and the air carried the musty smell of long abandonment, mixed with something else. Something that might have been fear, or might have been decay. Yet someone had been here recently, and recently indeed, fresh footprints marked the dusty floors in several places, and candles had been placed throughout the ground floor in careful arrangement, waiting to be lit as though for some dark ceremony. "The house has been prepared for our arrival with considerable care and forethought," Poirot observed, striking a match and lighting the candles one by one as the group made their cautious way deeper into the building. "Our host, whoever they may be, has anticipated our coming and made arrangements to receive us." As light pushed back the shadows that had dominated the entrance hall, the house revealed itself to be a monument to eclectic taste and questionable judgment. The walls were covered with paintings of various quality and diverse subjects, the shelves crowded with objects from around the world that spoke of extensive travel and indiscriminate acquisition. And everywhere there were mirrors. Mirrors that reflected the candlelight and multiplied the 7 guests into a small army of fearful faces stretching away into infinity. Marcus Thornwood was a collector in more ways than one, Captain Sterling muttered darkly, his eyes moving restlessly from shadow to shadow, as though expecting attack at any moment. He gathered objects as well as secrets, accumulated possessions as greedily as he accumulated power over other human beings. "And now someone has gathered us," Dr. Whitfield added, his physician's calm beginning to fray visibly at the edges. 7 people brought together for some purpose we don't yet understand and may not survive to comprehend. "Perhaps we do understand, at least in part," Mrs. Aldridge said, her aristocratic voice trembling despite her obvious efforts to maintain composure. "The telegram was explicit and chilling in its clarity. The 7th guest dies at dawn. One of us has been marked for death, selected by whatever twisted logic governs our host's intentions. The question we must ask ourselves is, which one of the 7 has been chosen as the sacrifice? Or perhaps," Miss Crane offered hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, "the question is rather, which 6 of us will die before the dawn breaks over London, leaving only the 7th alive to tell the tale of what transpired here?" The distinction was chilling in its implications. One interpretation suggested a single victim selected from among the 7 guests. The other suggested a massacre that would leave only a single survivor to witness the sun's rising. "We must search this house from top to bottom," Poirot declared with firm authority. "We must find who has brought us here, and discover why they have chosen to torment us in this manner. But we will stay together throughout our search. No one goes anywhere alone, under any circumstances. Whatever threatens us within these walls, we face it as a unified group, not as isolated individuals waiting to be picked off one by one. The search revealed more questions than answers, which troubled Poirot considerably. The house contained 7 bedrooms on the upper floors, each prepared with fresh linens and personal items that seemed chosen specifically for each individual guest. Miss Crane's room contained books from her publishing house, titles she had personally edited. Mr. Blackwood's room featured samples of the exotic goods he imported from distant lands. Dr. Whitfield's room held medical instruments of the precise type he favoured in his practice. Each space was personalised, with an intimacy that suggested their mysterious host knew them far better than any stranger should have been able to know them. "This is wrong on every possible level," Miss Templeton breathed, standing in the doorway of her designated room with an expression of profound disturbance. "Everything about this situation is deeply and fundamentally wrong. Someone has been watching us, studying us, learning everything about our lives, our habits, our preferences, our private spaces. They know us better than our own families know us." "For 7 years, perhaps," Poirot suggested thoughtfully, his grey cells working furiously to assemble the fragments of this puzzle into a coherent picture. "Since the death of Marcus Thornwood, our mysterious host has been gathering information, building dossiers, preparing this elaborate trap with patience that borders on the obsessive." "You believe his death is connected to our presence here tonight?" "I believe nothing in this situation is coincidental. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is without meaning. 7 guests, 7 years, 7 bedrooms prepared with personal knowledge that could only come from extensive surveillance." The number 7 appears far too often to be mere happenstance. It was Mr. Fletcher who found the first concrete clue, a document hidden in the study behind a false panel that he discovered quite by accident, sealed with wax, bearing an unfamiliar crest that none of them recognized. "It's addressed to all of us," he said, breaking the seal with trembling fingers that betrayed his legal composure. "Dated yesterday, the day before we received our telegrams." He read aloud in a voice that grew increasingly unsteady as the words revealed themselves. "To my 7 guests, you have been brought together to this place because you share a common bond. A bond forged 7 years ago in this very house, on the night that Marcus Thornwood drew his final breath and departed this world. You may claim innocence, may profess ignorance, may insist with the greatest conviction that you have never met each other before tonight. But I know the truth of what happened here. I know what each of you did, what role each of you played in the death of an innocent man. Before dawn breaks over London, justice will be served at last. The guilty will pay for their crimes with the only currency that truly matters. Only the truly innocent among you will survive to see the sunrise. 6 shall fall in the darkness. The 7th shall stand in the light. Your judge, your jury, your executioner awaits. May God have mercy on your souls, for I shall show you none. Chapter 3. The Accusations. The reading of the letter transformed the atmosphere in 47 Whitmore Gardens from mere fear to something closer to outright panic. The 7 guests, who had huddled together against an unknown external threat, now regarded each other with sudden suspicion and undisguised hostility. The fragile alliance of terror shattered by the implications of the words they had just heard.
"This is absurd,"
Mr. Blackwood sputtered, his portly face flushing with indignation that might have been genuine or might have been carefully calculated. "I never knew Marcus Thornwood personally. I was never in this house before tonight. The accusations contained in that letter are completely and utterly baseless." "Are they, indeed?" Captain Sterling's voice was cold as winter steel. "Can you prove you weren't here 7 years ago? Can any of us prove our whereabouts on that particular night?" "I can prove nothing about where I was 7 years ago on a random evening, but I know with absolute certainty that I am innocent of whatever crime this madman is alleging against me." "Someone in this room is not innocent," Miss Crane said quietly, her voice cutting through the rising argument. "The letter is specific in its accusations. It accuses us of complicity in Thornwood's death. Either the writer is completely delusional and has constructed an elaborate fantasy around innocent people, or some of us have been lying about our connections to this place and this man." All eyes in the room turned accusingly to the three who had recognized the address: Captain Sterling, Mrs. Aldridge, and Dr. Whitfield. These three had already admitted some connection to Marcus Thornwood. Now the letter's accusations made their admissions seem far more damning than simple acquaintance. "You admitted knowing of Marcus Thornwood when we first gathered at Monsieur Poirot's residence," Poirot said, his voice calm, but his eyes sharp and watchful. "Perhaps you should explain more fully the nature of that acquaintance and what dealings you had with the deceased." Captain Sterling was the first to respond, his military bearing reasserting itself despite the obvious strain of the situation. "I knew Thornwood through my regiment, as I said earlier. He was a civilian contractor who supplied certain specialized goods to military officers who required discretion in their purchases. The nature of those goods varied considerably, depending on the buyer's needs, but they often involved items that officers would prefer not to obtain through official military channels, where records might be kept." "You are speaking of contraband goods, items obtained or sold outside the law?" "I am speaking of discretion in military matters," Sterling replied with careful precision. "Thornwood could acquire almost anything, for a price that reflected both the difficulty of acquisition and the risk he assumed. And he kept meticulous records of every transaction, every buyer, every special request made by his clients over the years. Those records gave him tremendous power over everyone who dealt with him, which was precisely why he maintained them so carefully." "Including yourself?" "Including myself. I purchased items through Thornwood that I would not want examined too closely. Nothing treasonous, nothing truly criminal, but enough to damage my reputation if exposed." Mrs. Aldridge spoke next, her aristocratic composure showing cracks. "My husband dealt with Thornwood. Frederick was a collector of antiquities, and Thornwood could obtain pieces that legitimate dealers could not. After Frederick died, I discovered that some of those pieces had been improperly acquired. Stolen from museums, taken from archaeological sites without permission. Thornwood had documentation proving my husband's involvement in the black market. And he used this documentation against you. He used it to extract payments. For years, I paid him to keep silent about Frederick's crimes. When he died, I thought I was finally free." Dr. Whitfield was the most reluctant to speak, his nervous manner intensifying as attention focused on him. Thornwood was a patient of mine. I cannot discuss the details. Physician-patient confidentiality extends even beyond death. But I will say that I witnessed things in this house that troubled me deeply, and I said nothing. My silence was bought with threats against my family, against my career. I am not proud of what I failed to do. And the rest of you? Poirot turned to the remaining 4 guests. You maintain that you have no connection to Marcus Thornwood? None whatsoever, Mr. Blackwood insisted. I never heard his name before tonight, Miss Crane agreed. Nor I, Miss Templeton added. Mr. Fletcher hesitated. I may have encountered reference to him in legal documents. My firm handles estate matters, and the name seems familiar, but I cannot recall the specifics. Poirot studied each face, searching for signs of deception. The 3 who had admitted connections showed relief at having unburdened themselves. The 4 who denied any connection showed varying degrees of conviction. Some appeared genuinely puzzled, others less certainly innocent. The letter accuses all 7 of you of complicity in Thornwood's death, he said. Yet only 3 admit to knowing him, and none admit to being present when he died. Either the accusation is false, or some of you are continuing to conceal the truth. Perhaps the accusation is false, Mr. Fletcher suggested. Perhaps this is the work of a disturbed individual who has constructed an elaborate fantasy. Then why choose these specific 7 people? Why create personalized rooms with intimate knowledge of each guest's life? No, Monsieur Fletcher, this is not random delusion. This is calculated revenge. Revenge for something that happened in this house 7 years ago. Chapter 4. The First Death. The clock in the hallway struck 2 when they found the first body. Mr. Herbert Blackwood had stepped away from the group, despite Poirot's warnings, claiming he needed to use the facilities. When 5 minutes passed without his return, they went searching and found him in the bathroom on the 2nd floor, slumped against the wall, with a look of frozen horror on his face. He was quite dead, and had been dead, Dr. Whitfield estimated, for only minutes. Poison, the physician announced after a brief examination. Fast-acting, probably in something he ingested. Look, there's a glass here, with residue at the bottom. The glass stood on the edge of the sink, innocent-looking, except for the faint discoloration that marked its contents. He drank from a glass that was waiting for him in the bathroom, Poirot observed, placed here by our host, who knew that thirst or habit would compel him to drink. How could anyone know he would come to this specific bathroom? Captain Stirling demanded. The bathroom adjoins the bedroom that was prepared for Monsieur Blackwood. The personal items in that room, the familiar objects, they were designed to draw him here, to make him feel this space was intended for him. And once here, the glass would seem natural, expected. My God, Miss Crane whispered. We're being herded, manipulated. The whole house is a trap, designed to lead us to our deaths. Then we must refuse to be herded. We must stay together, touch nothing that has been prepared for us, trust nothing that seems too convenient. But the damage was done. One of the 7 guests was dead, and the night had barely begun. The others looked at each other with fresh horror, wondering who would be next, wondering if the killer was among them or lurking in the shadows of this death-haunted house. The letter said 6 would fall and the 7th would stand, Mr. Fletcher recalled. Blackwood is the first. That leaves 5 more deaths before dawn. Unless we stop this, Poirot said firmly. "Unless we discover who is behind these murders and prevent them from claiming any more victims."
How? We don't even know if the killer is one of us or someone else entirely.
We know several things. We know the killer has intimate knowledge of all 7 guests. We know they have had access to this house to prepare it for tonight's events. We know they blame these 7 people for Marcus Thornwood's death. And we know they intend to complete their revenge before sunrise. None of which tells us who they are or how to stop them. Then we must learn more. We must discover what really happened in this house 7 years ago. Someone here knows the truth, perhaps several someones. The time for concealment is past. If we do not share what we know, we will all die with our secrets. Chapter 5. The truth begins to emerge. They gathered in the drawing room, the 6 survivors forming a defensive circle around the fireplace, where Dr. Whitfield had managed to coax a small blaze to life. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the windows, and somewhere in the house, they knew, a killer waited for the opportunity to strike again. "We must be completely honest with each other," Poirot began. "Monsieur Blackwood is dead because we did not take the threat seriously enough. We cannot afford more such mistakes." "Blackwood claimed to have no connection to Thornwood," Captain Sterling observed. "Either he was lying, or the killer's criteria for guilt are broader than we understand." "Tell me about Marcus Thornwood's death," Poirot said. "Not the rumours, not the speculation, but the facts as you know them." It was Dr. Whitfield who answered, his earlier reluctance abandoned in the face of mounting terror. "Thornwood died on November 17th, 7 years ago. The official cause was heart failure, but there were irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The house was full of people that night, a gathering of some kind, though I was never clear on the purpose. When Thornwood collapsed, I was summoned to examine him. He was already dead when I arrived, but the symptoms suggested something other than natural heart failure." "Poison?" "Possibly. But I was pressured not to pursue that line of inquiry. Powerful people wanted the matter closed quickly and quietly. I was young, vulnerable to threats against my career. I signed the death certificate and said nothing." "Who pressured you?" "I don't know. The instructions came through intermediaries, accompanied by threats against my family. I never saw the people giving the orders." "You said the house was full of people. How many?" "I don't know exactly. I was only in the house briefly, and I was focused on the body. But I saw perhaps a dozen people in various rooms, all of them agitated, all of them seemingly anxious to leave." "Could any of them have been among our current company?" Dr. Whitfield looked around the room, his eyes moving from face to face. I'm not certain. It was 7 years ago, and I wasn't paying attention to faces. But it's possible. Some of these people might have been here that night." "I was here," Mrs. Aldridge admitted suddenly. "I was one of the guests at Thornwood's gathering. I didn't want to admit it earlier, but if we're being completely honest, yes, I was present when he died." "What was the nature of this gathering?" "Thornwood called it a settling of accounts. He had summoned everyone who owed him debts, financial, informational, or otherwise. He said he was dying, that he wanted to clear his ledgers before the end. We were all supposed to make final payments, receive whatever documents he held against us, and be free of his influence forever." "A blackmailer's retirement party," Mr. Fletcher observed dryly. "Essentially, yes. But something went wrong. Before the evening was over, Thornwood was dead, and all his records had vanished. The documents he held, the leverage he possessed, all of it disappeared. Some of us thought it was a miracle. Others suspected that one of us had arranged for a more permanent solution to our problems. Murder. We never spoke of it directly, but yes, the thought was in everyone's minds. Someone had killed Marcus Thornwood and destroyed his files, freeing all of his victims from his grasp. A benefactor, then, or a murderer, depending on your perspective. Both, perhaps. We were all too relieved to ask questions. We scattered, returned to our lives, and tried to forget that night ever happened. Until the telegrams arrived. Chapter 6. The Second Death. The clock struck 3 when they discovered that Miss Vera Templeton had stopped breathing. She had been sitting in a chair near the fire, so quiet and still that no one had noticed anything wrong until Dr. Whitfield observed that she had not moved in nearly half an hour. By the time they reached her, she was beyond any help medicine could provide. Another poison, Dr. Whitfield confirmed, his voice hollow with shock. Different from the one that killed Blackwood, but equally effective. She must have been dosed some time ago, possibly before we even reached the house. Before we reached the house? But how? The telegrams. They were delivered by messengers who offered refreshments, tea, water, small courtesies. Any of those could have been dosed with a slow-acting poison, timed to take effect during the night. You're saying we might all be poisoned already? Miss Crane's voice rose with panic. That we're all going to die, one by one, regardless of what we do. I'm saying the killer has had ample opportunity to poison us through various means. We must assume nothing is safe. No food, no drink, no item that has been prepared or offered by unknown hands. Poirot examined Miss Templeton's body with careful attention, noting the peaceful expression on her face, the slight smile that death had not erased. She knew, he said quietly. She knew she was dying, and she accepted it. How can you tell? Her posture, her expression, the way she'd positioned herself near the fire for warmth and comfort. She was preparing for the end, not fighting it. But why would she accept death? Why not warn us, not seek help? Perhaps because she believed she deserved it. Perhaps because she believed her death would protect someone else. We know nothing about Miss Templeton beyond her profession as a governess. What secrets might she have been hiding? Captain Sterling was examining the contents of Miss Templeton's handbag, which had been sitting beside her chair. "There's a letter here," he announced, "addressed to those who remain." He read aloud. "I know who killed Marcus Thornwood, because I helped them do it. I was young and desperate, employed by a man who demanded services beyond the educational. When I refused, Thornwood threatened to ruin me, to spread lies that would make me unemployable. I saw no way out except to help those who promised to free me. I mixed the poison that killed him. I don't know who supplied it or who directed the plan. I only know that I am guilty and that my guilt has haunted me every day since. Whoever is doing this is right to punish me. I deserve to die for what I did. But please, don't let them kill the others. Some of them are innocent. Some of them were victims too. I'm sorry for everything. Vera Templeton." The letter changed everything. Miss Templeton had not merely been present at Thornwood's death, she had been an active participant in his murder. she had mixed the poison that killed him. She was poisoned with the same type of substance she used to kill Thornwood, Dr. Whitfield realized. The killer knew what she had done and chose a fitting method of execution. Poetic justice, Mr. Fletcher murmured. Or cruel irony, depending on how you look at it. It means the killer knows the details of Thornwood's death, Poirot said. They know who was involved, what role each person played, how the murder was accomplished. This is not general revenge. This is specific, targeted punishment for specific crimes. Then those of us who weren't involved in the murder should be safe, Miss Crane said hopefully. Should we? Monsieur Blackwood claimed no connection to Thornwood, yet he was the first to die. Either he lied about his innocence, or the killer's definition of guilt encompasses more than direct participation in the murder. Chapter 4. Extended. The Investigation of Blackwood. After Mr. Blackwood's death, Poirot insisted on examining the body more thoroughly, despite Dr. Whitfield's initial assessment. Something about the businessman's presence troubled the detective. Blackwood had claimed no connection to Marcus Thornwood, yet he had been the first to die, suggesting the killer considered him highly culpable. "We must understand why Monsieur Blackwood was targeted," Poirot said, searching the dead man's pockets with methodical care. "His death was not random. None of these deaths are random. The killer has chosen their victims with specific purpose." The search revealed several items of interest. A wallet containing a substantial amount of cash and business cards identifying Blackwood as an importer of fine goods and specialties. A pocket watch engraved with initials that did not match his own, and a small leather notebook filled with coded entries. "A code," Mr. Fletcher observed, examining the notebook. "Dates and amounts, I would guess, though the cipher is unfamiliar." "It is a merchant's code," Poirot said, recognizing certain patterns. "Used for recording transactions that the writer wishes to keep confidential. I have encountered similar systems in cases involving smuggling and black market trade." "You're suggesting Blackwood was a criminal?" "I am suggesting that his business may have involved activities he preferred not to document openly. The question is whether those activities connected him to Marcus Thornwood." Captain Sterling, who had been examining the pocket watch, made a discovery. "The initials on this watch are MT. Marcus Thornwood, I would wager. Blackwood was carrying a dead man's property. Or he took it from Thornwood's possessions after the murder, a trophy perhaps, or a valuable that he could not resist claiming. Which would make him a thief as well as whatever else he was. The coded notebook, when eventually deciphered with Mr. Fletcher's legal expertise, revealed transactions that painted Blackwood in an even darker light. He had been Thornwood's partner in several ventures, smuggling antiquities, trading in stolen goods, even facilitating the movement of contraband across international borders. He wasn't just one of Thornwood's victims, Miss Crane realized. He was one of his accomplices. Which explains why he denied any connection. He was not being blackmailed by Thornwood. He was profiting alongside him. And when Thornwood died, Blackwood inherited a portion of his criminal network, making him complicit in a different way. Not a victim who killed his oppressor, but a partner who benefited from his colleague's death. The killer clearly knew this. They punished Blackwood not for participating in Thornwood's murder, but for profiting from the criminal enterprise that murder disrupted. This revelation expanded the scope of the mystery considerably. The killer was not merely punishing those who had conspired to murder Marcus Thornwood. They were punishing anyone who had benefited from his death, anyone who had connections to his criminal activities, anyone who had escaped consequences that should have found them. Chapter 7. Extended. The Military Connection. Captain Sterling's death led Poirot to investigate the military aspects of the case more thoroughly. The garrote used in the killing was indeed military issue, and its employment suggested someone with intimate knowledge of Sterling's service record. Sterling served in several colonial campaigns, Poirot learned from inquiries made through official channels. His record shows commendations for bravery and leadership, but there are gaps, periods where his activities are not documented or are classified beyond normal access. The cover-up Mrs. Aldridge mentioned. Precisely. Something happened during one of those undocumented periods. Something that Thornwood discovered and used as leverage. Further investigation revealed the nature of Sterling's concealed crime. During a suppression campaign in a colonial territory, Sterling had ordered an action that resulted in civilian casualties, women and children killed in what was officially recorded as a firefight with insurgents, but was actually a reprisal massacre. He ordered the killing of innocents, Miss Crane said, horror evident in her voice, and then covered it up. And Thornwood found out. The blackmailer had contacts everywhere, including within the military hierarchy. He obtained documents proving Sterling's culpability and used them to extract payment and cooperation. So, when Sterling participated in Thornwood's murder, he was protecting himself from exposure for a far greater crime. Exactly. The conspiracy was not merely about ending blackmail, it was about preventing the revelation of horrors that would have destroyed careers and lives. Sterling was not the only one with such secrets. Others in the conspiracy had their own hidden sins that Thornwood's files threatened to expose. This understanding cast the entire night in a different light. The 7 guests were not simply murder conspirators. They were a collection of people with terrible secrets. People who had killed Marcus Thornwood not to escape mere blackmail, but to prevent the exposure of crimes that ranged from embezzlement to war atrocities. Helena Thornwood knew all of this, Poirot realized. She had her father's records, and she understood exactly what each of her victims had done. Her revenge was not blind, it was precise, calculated, designed to punish each person for their specific sins. Chapter 9. Extended. The Doctor's Secrets. Dr. Whitfield's death prompted Poirot to examine the physician's role in the original conspiracy more carefully. The false death certificate had been a crucial element in covering up Thornwood's murder. But there was more to Whitfield's involvement than mere document falsification. A physician who falsifies documents is violating his professional oath, Mr. Fletcher observed. But the threats Whitfield mentioned, threats against his family, suggest he was coerced rather than voluntary. Unless the threats were manufactured, an excuse created to justify his participation. Investigation revealed that Dr. Whitfield had been treating Marcus Thornwood for a chronic condition for several years before the murder. He had access to Thornwood's medical records, to his home, to his daily routines. He knew when Thornwood was vulnerable, when he was alone, when an attack would be most likely to succeed. He was the inside man, Poirot concluded, the one who provided information about Thornwood's habits and health, the one who ensured that the poison would be effective and that the death would appear natural. So his role was not merely covering up the murder after the fact. He helped plan it, and was compensated accordingly. Records show that Whitfield's financial situation improved dramatically after Thornwood's death. He purchased a new home, invested in expanding his practice, sent his children to expensive schools. Money that came from somewhere. From the conspiracy. From the grateful conspirators who valued his contribution enough to reward it generously. The medication that killed Whitfield had been his own prescription, a sedative he took regularly to manage anxiety. The killer had replaced his pills with poison, knowing that stress would drive him to self-medicate, and that his death would therefore appear, with bitter irony, to be another natural event that the doctor had failed to anticipate. "He died the way Thornwood died," Miss Crane observed, "poisoned by someone who understood his habits and vulnerabilities." Helena learned from her father's murder and applied those lessons to her revenge. She became a student of death, analyzing the original crime so she could replicate its methods against those who committed it. Chapter 11. Extended. The Hidden Room's Secrets. When Poirot and Miss Crane finally reached Helena's observation post, they discovered more than just the mechanisms of death. The room contained Helena's research files, comprehensive dossiers on each of the 7 guests, documenting their crimes, their connections to her father, and the specific punishments she had designed for them. "She spent years preparing this," Poirot observed, paging through the meticulously organized files. "Every detail planned, every contingency anticipated." The file on Herbert Blackwood revealed that she had traced his criminal partnership with her father through banking records and shipping manifests. She knew exactly what goods he had helped smuggle, what percentage of the profits he had claimed, how he had expanded his illicit activities after Thornwood's death. Vera Templeton's file contained the governess's original employment records, correspondence with the conspiracy's organizers, and the formula for the poison she had mixed. Helena had obtained this information from her father's hidden files, which Templeton herself had helped preserve after the murder. Captain Sterling's dossier included military documents that should have been classified. Documents proving his responsibility for civilian deaths. Helena had obtained these through contacts she had cultivated over years, building a network of informants, as her father had done before her. Dr. Whitfield's file contained medical records, financial statements, and detailed analysis of his prescription habits. Helena had known exactly which medication he relied on, exactly when he would reach for it, exactly how much time the poison would take to act. Mrs. Aldridge's dossier traced her husband's involvement in the conspiracy and documented her own knowledge of his crimes. She had helped destroy evidence, had concealed information from investigators, had benefited from her husband's share of the profits generated by Thornwood's elimination. Simon Fletcher's file was perhaps the most troubling. Helena had recruited him deliberately, had approached his law firm knowing that he would be assigned to her case, had manipulated him into becoming her unwitting accomplice. His death was punishment for helping her, even though she had engineered that help herself. "She used him," Miss Crane said, understanding dawning. "She made him part of her plan, and then killed him for being part of it." She believed he should have recognized what she was doing and refused to help. His legal training should have warned him that something was wrong with her requests, that her interest in the old case was more than academic. By failing to question her motives, he became complicit in her revenge. That seems unfair. Murder is never fair, mademoiselle. Helena's standards of guilt were her own, and they did not require the same level of participation she demanded of herself. Chapter 14. Extended. The investigation's continuation. In the weeks following the massacre, Poirot worked with Inspector Japp to trace the full extent of the original conspiracy. Using information from Helena's files and his own subsequent investigation, they identified at least 6 additional individuals who had participated in Marcus Thornwood's murder, but had not been summoned to the house that night. "Should we arrest them?" Japp asked. "On what grounds? The evidence we have comes from a convicted murderer's private files that were compiled illegally and would likely be inadmissible in court. And even if we could prosecute, The deaths of so many conspirators would make any trial a circus of accusations and denials. So they go free, as they have been free for 7 years. Helena's revenge punished 6 of them. The remaining conspirators will live with the knowledge that someone might come for them next. Is that justice? It is reality. Our system of law is imperfect, and those imperfections sometimes allow the guilty to escape. We can work to improve the system, can ensure that future investigations are more thorough, can learn from our failures, but we cannot undo the past. The investigation did, however, reveal the identity of one additional conspirator who was still actively causing harm. A businessman named Gerard Vance had been part of the original plot and was now using Thornwood's methods, blackmail and extortion, to build his own criminal empire. He learned from Thornwood and now continues his work, Poirot observed. The student has become the master. We can arrest him for current crimes, even if we can't touch him for the old ones. The pursuit of Gerard Vance became Poirot's next case, a direct continuation of the work that Helena Thornwood had begun. He approached the investigation with the thoroughness that had been lacking 7 years earlier, leaving no stone unturned, questioning every assumption, refusing to accept convenient conclusions. The case took months to build, but when it was complete, Gerard Vance found himself facing charges that would keep him in prison for decades. The last active remnant of Marcus Thornwood's criminal network was finally brought down. Helena would appreciate the irony, Japp observed. You're finishing what she started. I am doing what I should have done 7 years ago. The method is different. Proper investigation, legal prosecution, courtroom justice. But the goal is the same: ensuring that criminals face consequences for their actions. Better late than never, I suppose. Better late than never. But how much better it would have been to do it right the first time, when lives might have been saved and tragedies prevented. Chapter 16. Extended. The survivors meet. Several years after the events at 47 Whitmore Gardens, Poirot and Miss Eleanor Crane found themselves at the same charity event. A coincidence that neither had anticipated, but that both found strangely appropriate. Monsieur Poirot, she greeted him. I didn't expect to see you here. Nor I you, mademoiselle. Madame, I should say now. I understand congratulations are in order. She smiled, and for the first time since that terrible night, the expression seemed genuine. I married 2 years ago. We have a daughter now. I am glad. You deserved happiness after everything you endured. Did I? Sometimes I still wonder. I survived when others died, and I've never been entirely certain why. Because you were innocent. Your father's crimes were not your crimes, and the killer, for all her faults, recognized that distinction. Helena. Have you heard anything about her? Nothing since her release. She has disappeared completely, which is perhaps what she wanted. A new life, far from the memories of the old one. Do you think she found peace? I do not know. Some wounds never heal, and Helena carried deeper wounds than most. But I hope she found something. If not peace, then at least a cessation of pain. They spoke for some time about the intervening years, about the changes in their lives, about the lessons they had drawn from their shared experience. Miss Crane, Mrs. Thompson now, had found purpose in working with victims of crime, helping others process trauma that she understood intimately. That night changed everything for me, she said. I couldn't go back to my old life, couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. I had to find meaning in the suffering, had to turn it into something positive. A worthy goal. Many people are destroyed by such experiences. Few find the strength to transform them into purpose. I learned that from watching you, actually. The way you kept working, kept investigating, kept pursuing truth even after everything fell apart. You showed me that it was possible to continue, to find meaning even in failure. I am humbled by your words. I did not feel like an example that night. I felt like a failure, like someone whose carelessness had cost lives. You were both. That's the truth of human nature, isn't it? We can be failures and examples at the same time, can make terrible mistakes and still do good work. The seventh guest died at dawn, but they were also reborn, transformed into something different than they had been before. A phoenix metaphor. Perhaps the night burned away our illusions, stripped us down to our essential selves. What we built from those ashes was different from what we had before, but it was also, in some ways, better, more honest, more aware, more committed to doing things right. The wisdom that comes from suffering. The only wisdom worth having, perhaps. Easy knowledge is easily forgotten. Knowledge earned through pain stays with us forever. Chapter 7. The Connections Revealed. With 2 of their number dead, the 5 survivors and Poirot retreated to the study, barricading the door and refusing to consume anything that had not been brought from outside the house. The detective had produced a small flask of water from his own coat pocket, and this they shared sparingly as the hours crept toward dawn.
We must reconstruct that night 7 years ago, Poirot said. Every detail matters. Mrs. Aldridge, you admitted being present. Tell us everything you remember. The widow nodded, her composure cracking further under the strain.
There were about 15 people at Thornwood's gathering. I recognized some of them, fellow collectors, business associates of my late husband, a few society figures who had reason to fear Thornwood's leverage.
Did you recognize any of our current company?
I'm not certain. The lighting was poor, and I was focused on my own concerns. But Captain Sterling, yes, I believe I saw you there.
The captain nodded grimly. I was present. I'd come to retrieve certain documents that Thornwood held. He had records of purchases I'd made through his network. Nothing treasonous, but enough to end my career if exposed. Did you obtain these documents?
I never got the chance. Thornwood collapsed before the transactions could be completed. In the chaos that followed, everyone scattered. I assumed the documents had been destroyed, along with everything else.
What about the others? Poirot turned to Miss Crane and Mr. Fletcher. You both maintained that you had no connection to Thornwood. Is this still your claim?
Miss Crane's face had gone pale. I need to tell you something. I didn't know Marcus Thornwood personally, but I knew of him. My father was one of his victims. Thornwood had evidence that my father had embezzled funds from his employer, evidence that would have destroyed our family if exposed. My father paid blackmail for years, and the stress eventually killed him. He died of a heart attack 2 years before Thornwood's death. So you had reason to hate Thornwood? To hate his memory, yes. But I didn't know about the gathering, didn't know he was dead until much later. I had no involvement in his murder. Then why were you summoned here tonight? I don't know. Perhaps because of my father's connection? Perhaps because the killer believes the sins of the fathers should be visited upon the children. Mr. Fletcher was the last to speak, and his revelation was perhaps the most surprising.
I lied about not recognizing Thornwood's name. I know exactly who he was. And I know who inherited his estate. Who? A woman named Helena Thornwood, Marcus's daughter. She was 17 when he died, away at school and apparently ignorant of her father's criminal activities. The estate was held in trust until she came of age, and the house was closed up, supposedly until she decided what to do with it. Helena Thornwood, Poirot repeated. And where is this woman now? That's the thing. I've been trying to locate her for a client who has business with the estate. She seems to have vanished. No one has seen or heard from her in nearly 2 years. Since the time when she would have gained full control of her inheritance. Exactly. I assumed she had simply chosen to live abroad, away from her father's tainted legacy. But now, I wonder... You wonder if Helena Thornwood is our host tonight? If she has discovered the truth about her father's death and returned to exact revenge? It would explain everything. The intimate knowledge of each guest, the access to this house, the 7-year delay while she came of age and learned the truth. Helena Thornwood has more reason than anyone to want revenge against the people who killed her father. Chapter 8. The Third Death. Captain Sterling excused himself to check the window fastenings, despite Poirot's warnings about separating from the group. He was gone less than 3 minutes, but when they found him, those 3 minutes had been more than enough. He lay in the hallway, just outside the study door, a thin, wire garrote still wrapped around his throat. His face was purple, his eyes bulging, his hands frozen in a futile attempt to loosen the deadly cord. "He never even cried out," Miss Crane whispered, horror-struck. "We heard nothing." "The killer is in the house with us," Mr. Fletcher said, stating the obvious. "They've been here all along, watching, waiting for opportunities." "The wire is military issue," Dr. Whitfield observed, examining the garrote without touching it. "Standard equipment for certain specialized operations. Captain Sterling would have recognized it, probably did recognize it in his final moments." "Killed by a tool of his own profession," Poirot said. "As Miss Templeton was killed by the type of poison she herself employed. The killer is making a statement with each death, fitting the punishment to the crime." "What was Sterling's crime? He admitted to buying contraband, but is that worthy of execution?" "Perhaps his crime was greater than he admitted. Or perhaps there are sins he did not confess, sins connected to his military service, to the specialized operations that would make such a garrote familiar to him." Mrs. Aldridge spoke up, her voice trembling. "I remember something about Captain Sterling now. At Thornwood's gathering, there was talk of a military matter, something about a village, casualties, a cover-up. Thornwood had documents proving that an officer had ordered actions that resulted in civilian deaths, and that the matter had been concealed from the authorities. You believe Captain Sterling was this officer?" "I don't know for certain, but the conversation stopped whenever he came near, and people looked at him strangely. If he was responsible for civilian deaths, and Thornwood knew about it, then his crime was far greater than mere contraband. He was complicit in atrocity, and Thornwood's death freed him from the threat of exposure." "Making his execution tonight a form of justice," Mr. Fletcher observed. "The killer isn't just avenging Thornwood's death. They're punishing crimes that would have gone unpunished if Thornwood had lived." It was a disturbing thought. Marcus Thornwood had been a blackmailer, a criminal who profited from others' misery. But his death had also silenced a witness to serious crimes, had allowed guilty parties to escape consequences they deserved.
Was the killer tonight truly a monster? Or were they a dark angel of justice, punishing sins that the law had failed to address? "We cannot think of it that way," Poirot said firmly. "Murder is murder, regardless of the victim's guilt. The killer has appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner, roles they have no right to assume. Whatever crimes these people may have committed, they deserved trials, not assassinations." "Easy for you to say," Mrs. Aldridge snapped, her composure finally breaking. "You're not on the list. You're not waiting to be the next one killed." "I am on the list, madam. I received a summons just as you did. The killer brought me here for a reason, perhaps to witness their justice, perhaps to be punished for failing to prevent Thornwood's murder in the first place. Either way, I am as much a target as any of you." Chapter 9. The Fourth Death. They had retreated to the dining room, the most defensible space they could find, when Dr. Whitfield suddenly clutched his chest and fell to his knees. "Poison," he gasped. "The water from your flask, contaminated." Horror flooded through the survivors. They had all drunk from Poirot's flask, believing it to be safe. If the water was poisoned... But Poirot showed no symptoms, nor did Miss Crane, Mrs. Aldridge, or Mr. Fletcher. Only Dr. Whitfield was affected, his face turning grey as the poison did its work. Not the water, Poirot realised. Something else. Something only the doctor consumed. "His medical bag," Miss Crane pointed. "He took pills from it earlier. Said they were for his nerves." The medical bag lay open on the table, its contents familiar to any physician, but deadly in the wrong hands. Someone had tampered with the doctor's own medication, turning his remedy into his death sentence. "He was treating himself," Mrs. Aldridge said. "He had anxiety, took pills to manage it. The killer knew his habits, knew he would self-medicate under stress." "Another fitting execution," Mr. Fletcher observed grimly. "The physician who signed a false death certificate, killed by his own medicine." Dr. Whitfield died as the clock struck 4, leaving only 4 survivors to face the remaining hours until dawn. "We must think," Poirot said, his own composure showing cracks for the first time. "We must understand what connects these victims beyond their presence at Thornwood's gathering." "They were all guilty," Miss Crane said. "Blackwood must have had some involvement we didn't know about. Miss Templeton confessed to mixing the poison. Captain Sterling concealed war crimes. Dr. Whitfield falsified a death certificate. They all did something wrong, and they all paid for it." "But Mrs. Aldridge, Monsieur Fletcher, and yourself, you have also been summoned. What are your crimes?" "I told you, my connection was through my father. I did nothing wrong myself. And I was merely searching for Helena Thornwood on behalf of a client," Mr. Fletcher added. "My involvement is entirely professional. Yet you are both here, both marked for death. Either your innocence is not as complete as you believe, or the killer's definition of guilt is different from what we have assumed." Mrs. Aldridge was trembling now, her aristocratic composure entirely gone. "I have to tell you something. Something I should have said earlier." "Speak, madame. We have no more time for secrets." "My husband, Frederick, didn't just deal with Thornwood in antiquities. He was one of the people who planned Thornwood's murder. He and several others, people who couldn't bear Thornwood's leverage any longer. They conspired to end him permanently."
Your husband was one of the architects of the murder.
Yes. He died 2 years after Thornwood, supposedly of natural causes.
But now I wonder if he was another victim of this same revenge. And if so, I may be targeted not for my own crimes, but for his, the wife of a murderer, sharing in his guilt. Chapter 10. The Fifth Death. Mrs. Constance Aldridge died at 4:30, in a manner that was, perhaps, the most theatrical of all. She had gone to the window, drawn by a sound outside, a sound that turned out to be nothing but the wind. But in turning back to the room, she triggered something, a mechanism concealed in the window frame, a blade that swung down with terrible precision and ended her life instantly. "A trap," Mr. Fletcher breathed, staring at the bloody scene with horrified fascination. "The house is full of traps, designed for specific victims."
"The window in the dining room,"
Poirot observed.
"The room where Mrs.
Aldridge's husband might have stood during Thornwood's gathering. The killer has thought of everything. How do we know we're not standing on traps right now? How do we know every step we take isn't potentially our last? We do not know. That is the genius of this revenge. It has made every space dangerous, every action suspect. The killer does not need to be present to kill. They have turned the entire house into their weapon. Only 3 guests remained now: Miss Eleanor Crane, Mr. Simon Fletcher, and Poirot himself. The dawn was still more than an hour away, and the killer had promised that 6 would fall before the 7th could survive.
"One of us 3 is the 7th guest,"
Miss Crane said.
"One of us is meant to survive."
"Or perhaps none of us," Mr. Fletcher countered. "Perhaps the 7th guest is the killer themselves, the one who orchestrates everything from the shadows. Helena Thornwood. If she is indeed our host, we still have no proof." Poirot had been examining the mechanism that had killed Mrs. Aldridge, his nimble fingers tracing its construction.
"This trap was installed recently, within the past few days. The mechanism is modern, precise, designed by someone with engineering knowledge."
Helena Thornwood studied engineering, Mr. Fletcher recalled. "It was in the files I reviewed when searching for her. She was at university, studying mechanical engineering when her father died."
"Then she has the skills to design these traps, and she has had years to plan, to prepare, to transform this house into a killing ground. But why now? Why wait 7 years?
Perhaps she only recently learned the truth about her father's death. Perhaps she needed time to identify all the guilty parties and plan her revenge. Or perhaps there is some significance to the date, the 7th anniversary of Thornwood's murder.
Today is November 17th,
Miss Crane realized.
Exactly 7 years since he died.
An anniversary execution. Helena Thornwood has waited 7 years to punish her father's killers, and she has chosen the exact date of his death to carry out her justice. Chapter 11. The revelations continue. With less than an hour until dawn, Poirot insisted that the 3 survivors remain absolutely still, touching nothing, triggering no mechanisms. They stood in the centre of the drawing room, away from windows and walls, speaking in hushed tones as the night crawled toward its conclusion.
"We must consider the possibility that the killer is among us," Poirot said.
"That one of you 3 is Helena Thornwood, or is working with her."
"That's absurd,"
Miss Crane protested.
"I've been a potential victim all night, same as everyone else."
"Have you?" You have survived while 4 others have died. You claim innocence, but your connection to Thornwood through your father suggests deeper involvement than you've admitted.
I was a child when my father died, barely 18 when Thornwood was murdered. I knew nothing of the conspiracy.
And yet you are here, summoned by the same telegram, marked by the same threats. Why would Helena Thornwood include an innocent woman in her revenge? Mr. Fletcher spoke up. Unless she's not innocent. Unless Eleanor Crane knew more about her father's involvement than she's admitted.
Or unless... Unless what? Unless Eleanor Crane is Helena Thornwood. The accusation hung in the air, electric and terrible. Miss Crane stared at Fletcher with shock that seemed too genuine to be feigned. That's insane. I'm Eleanor Crane. I've always been Eleanor Crane. I have identification, history, a life that can be verified. Helena Thornwood had access to considerable resources when she came of age. She could have created a false identity, could have inserted herself into a publishing house that might have records related to her father's activities. She could have watched and waited, gathering information, planning her revenge. And invited herself to be murdered. That makes no sense. Unless the invitation was cover. Unless you knew the deaths would be targeted at specific people, and you would be safe because you controlled the weapons. Poirot watched this exchange with intense interest. The accusation was plausible, but he was not yet convinced. There were too many variables, too many possibilities that had not been explored. Before we accuse anyone, let us consider what we know. 5 people have died tonight, each killed in a manner that reflected their specific crimes. Mr. Blackwood, whose crime we did not learn before his death. Miss Templeton, who confessed to mixing the poison that killed Thornwood. Captain Sterling, killed with a military garrote that matched his concealed war crimes. Dr. Whitfield, poisoned by his own medication as punishment for falsifying a death certificate. Mrs. Aldridge, killed by a trap designed for her husband's treachery. The pattern suggests detailed knowledge of each person's specific involvement in Thornwood's death. Knowledge that could come from Thornwood's own records. Records that supposedly vanished when he died. Unless they didn't vanish, Mr. Fletcher said slowly. Unless someone took them. Someone who had access to the house in the chaos following his death. Helena would have been away at school. But she could have had an ally. Someone who was present that night, who gathered the records and preserved them for her. Who? The question led to a new examination of the night's events. Among the dead, who might have been Helena's ally? Who might have gathered her father's blackmail files and delivered them to her? Miss Templeton, Poirot said suddenly. She was a governess, potentially Helena's governess, and her confession letter spoke of helping those who promised to free me. What if one of those people was Helena herself? Helena would have been 17 when her father died, a child. A child who had grown up in this house, surrounded by her father's secrets. A child who might have known more than anyone suspected about the power her father wielded. You're suggesting Helena engineered her own father's death? I'm suggesting that the situation may be more complex than simple revenge for a murdered parent. What if Helena hated her father as much as his victims did? What if she wanted him dead, but also wanted to punish those who did the killing? That would make her both victim and perpetrator. Both avenging daughter and parricide conspirator. It would explain much about the contradictions in this case. The intimate knowledge of the victims, the elaborate planning, the theatrical nature of the deaths. This is not merely revenge,
It is a performance, a statement, a demonstration of power that Marcus Thornwood himself would have admired. Chapter 12. The clock strikes 5. The first grey light of dawn was beginning to show through the windows when the final trap was sprung. Mr. Simon Fletcher had been pacing, unable to stand still despite Poirot's warnings, and his foot caught on something. A nearly invisible wire stretched across the floor. The click of a mechanism was followed by a sharp hiss, and Fletcher staggered back, a dart embedded in his neck. "Don't touch it," Poirot warned, as Miss Crane moved to help. "The dart is almost certainly poisoned." Fletcher was already showing symptoms: the rapid breathing, the unfocused eyes, the trembling that signified a powerful neurotoxin at work. He had perhaps minutes to live, and he knew it. "I have to tell you," he gasped. "I wasn't just looking for Helena. I was protecting her." "Protecting her?" "She came to my firm 2 years ago, wanting to understand her father's death. I reviewed the files, told her what I found, and then I helped her plan this." "You were her accomplice?" "Not for the murders. I swear I didn't know she intended to kill anyone. I thought she just wanted to confront them, to expose their crimes. I helped her identify the guilty parties, helped her understand who had done what. When the telegrams came, I thought it was just meant to frighten them." "Where is she now? Where is Helena Thornwood?" Fletcher's eyes moved toward the ceiling, toward a point above their heads. "She's been watching. The whole time. There's a room, above the drawing room, with a view into every..." He died before he could finish, leaving Poirot and Miss Crane alone in the house of death as dawn finally broke over London. Chapter 13. The Final Confrontation. "Stay here," Poirot commanded Miss Crane, but she shook her head. "I'm not letting you face her alone. Besides, if I am Helena Thornwood, wouldn't you want to keep an eye on me?" Despite the grimness of the situation, Poirot almost smiled. "Very well. We go together." The hidden room was accessed through a panel in the upstairs hallway, a space that had been built into the house's architecture to allow observation of the rooms below. It was small, cramped, and filled with equipment. Mirrors and lenses that allowed viewing into multiple rooms simultaneously. Speaking tubes that carried sound from throughout the house, and mechanisms for triggering the various traps that had killed the night's victims. And there, seated before a complex control panel, was a young woman who could only be Helena Thornwood. She was perhaps 24, with dark hair and pale features that showed both exhaustion and exhilaration. She did not seem surprised to see them, did not reach for any weapon or try to trigger any remaining traps. She merely sat and watched them enter, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Monsieur Poirot, I wondered if you would find me before the end." "The end came some time ago, mademoiselle. 5 people are dead. Your revenge is complete." 6 people are dead. You forget, Mr. Fletcher, and my revenge is not complete. There is still one survivor. The 7th guest, who was meant to see the dawn. Miss Crane. No. You, Monsieur Poirot. You were always meant to be the 7th guest. The others were guilty of my father's murder, but you were guilty of something else entirely. I never knew your father. I was not present at his gathering. But you were consulted afterward. When questions arose about his death, someone hired you to investigate, and you concluded that there was nothing suspicious, that his death was natural.
You gave your seal of approval to the cover-up that protected his killers. Poirot felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the case now, a minor consultation years ago, when a wealthy family had asked him to review the circumstances of a relative's death. He had examined the evidence, found no definitive proof of foul play, and moved on to other matters.
I did not know the full circumstances. The evidence I was shown was incomplete.
Because you didn't look hard enough. Because you took their money and told them what they wanted to hear. You, the great detective, failed to detect the most obvious murder because you were paid to fail.
That is not what happened.
Isn't it? You accepted payment to review the case. You produced a report that found nothing conclusive. And you never followed up. Never asked questions. Never wondered if you had been manipulated. My father's killers went free because Hercule Poirot said there was nothing to find. The accusations struck deep because there was just enough truth in it to sting. Poirot had been casual with that case, had not applied his usual rigor, had accepted the first explanation that seemed plausible. He had failed, not through malice, but through carelessness, and that failure had allowed murderers to escape justice. You brought me here to punish me for that failure. I brought you here to witness my justice, to see what you should have uncovered 7 years ago, to understand the consequences of your negligence. And now? What happens now? Helena Thornwood rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. Now we wait for the police, who, I imagine, are on their way. Your Inspector Japp will arrive soon, won't he? He'll find the bodies, find the evidence, find my confession. I'll go to trial, and the world will learn what happened in this house, both 7 years ago and tonight. You plan to be caught? I plan to be heard. My father was a monster, yes, but he was murdered by people who were no better. They killed him not for justice, but to protect their own crimes. And when they escaped punishment, when your report sealed their safety, I knew that the only way to achieve justice was to administer it myself. 6 people are dead because of your justice. 6 guilty people, 6 criminals who would never have faced consequences otherwise. I am not proud of what I've done, Monsieur Poirot, but I am not ashamed either. The world is better for their absence. The world is never better for murder, mademoiselle. You have become the thing you claimed to punish. A killer who believes their crimes are justified. Perhaps. But at least I did not hide behind respectability while innocence suffered. At least I acted, while you and your kind looked the other way. The sound of vehicles outside announced the arrival of Inspector Japp and his officers. The night was over. The dawn had come. And the 7th guest, Hercule Poirot, had survived. But as he looked at Helena Thornwood's defiant face, he could not help feeling that survival was a hollow victory, purchased with the blood of 6 people whose deaths might have been prevented if he had been more diligent 7 years ago. Chapter 14. The Aftermath. Inspector Japp's face was grim as he surveyed the carnage at 47 Whitmore Gardens. 6 bodies, 1 living killer, and a detective who looked older than Japp had ever seen him. She's confessed to everything, Japp reported after Helena Thornwood had been taken into custody. The planning, the traps, the execution. She even kept records, detailed accounts of each victim's crimes and the punishment she designed for them. She wanted her justice to be understood, Poirot said wearily. She wanted the world to know that these were not random murders, but targeted executions. The defense will claim she's insane, a young woman traumatized by her father's death, driven to madness by grief and isolation. She is not insane. She is intelligent,
methodical, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness.
That is perhaps more frightening than madness. What about her accusations against you? The business about the report you wrote 7 years ago? Poirot was silent for a long moment. She was not entirely wrong, Jap. I was hired to review the circumstances of Marcus Thornwood's death, and I conducted a cursory investigation that found nothing conclusive. I did not dig deep enough, did not ask the right questions, did not pursue leads that might have revealed the truth. You couldn't have known, I should have known. I have built my reputation on seeing what others miss, on refusing to accept easy explanations, on pursuing truth regardless of where it leads. In this case, I failed to apply my own standards. I accepted payment for a shallow investigation and moved on without looking back. That doesn't make you responsible for tonight's murders, doesn't it? If I had uncovered the conspiracy 7 years ago, if I had brought the guilty to justice through proper channels, Helena Thornwood would have had no reason to create her own justice. My negligence created the conditions that made tonight's massacre possible. That's a stretch, Poirot. You can't blame yourself for the actions of a disturbed woman. I can blame myself for my own failures, and I do. Miss Eleanor Crane had been taken to the hospital for observation, though she showed no physical injuries from the night's events. Poirot visited her later that morning, wanting to assure himself that she was truly an innocent victim and not a participant in the conspiracy. "I still don't understand why I was included," she said from her hospital bed. "My father was one of Thornwood's victims, yes, but he had nothing to do with the murder." "Did he not?" Poirot asked gently. "Your father paid blackmail to Thornwood for years. When Thornwood's leverage vanished with his death, your father was among those who benefited. Helena may have believed that your father, or you through him, was part of the conspiracy." "I was 18 years old. I knew nothing about blackmail or murder." "But you knew something. You came tonight, despite the threats, despite the danger. Why?" Miss Crane was quiet for a moment. "Because I hoped it would be over. I've carried my father's shame for years. The knowledge of what he did, the embezzlement that started everything. I thought, maybe, if I faced whatever was waiting at that house, I could finally be free of it." "And are you free now?" "I don't know. I survived when others died. Is that freedom, or is it just another form of burden?" It was a question Poirot could not answer because he was grappling with a similar burden himself. The weight of survival, the guilt of failure, the knowledge that things could have been different if only he had been better, more careful, more true to his own principles. Chapter 15. The investigation deepens. In the days following the massacre at 47 Whitmore Gardens, Poirot conducted his own investigation into the events of 7 years ago, the investigation he should have done when first consulted. He interviewed witnesses, reviewed documents, pieced together the conspiracy that had led to Marcus Thornwood's death. The picture that emerged was both more complex and more damning than Helena's accusations had suggested. Marcus Thornwood had been a monster. A blackmailer who had destroyed lives for profit, who had driven men to suicide and women to ruin, who had wielded his knowledge like a weapon against anyone unfortunate enough to fall into his grasp. His death had been planned by a group of his victims who had finally decided that elimination was preferable to eternal servitude. The conspiracy had included at least a dozen people, though only 7 had been summoned to the house that fatal night. Frederick Aldridge had provided the organizational framework. Captain Sterling had supplied the military expertise. Dr. Whitfield had ensured the death certificate would pass scrutiny, and Miss Templeton, Helena's own governess,
had mixed the poison that stopped Marcus Thornwood's heart. But there were others involved who had not been present that night, who had provided funding or information or safe passage for the conspirators afterward. Some of these people were still alive, still enjoying the freedom that Thornwood's death had purchased. The conspiracy was larger than Helena knew, Poirot reported to Inspector Japp. She punished 6 people, but there were at least 6 more who were equally guilty. Should we pursue them? For a 7-year-old murder that was officially ruled natural causes? On what evidence? Helena destroyed Thornwood's records after extracting the information she needed, and the surviving conspirators will certainly not confess now that they've seen what happened to their colleagues. So, they get away with it? They got away with it 7 years ago, Japp. My failure ensured that. Pursuing them now would accomplish nothing except to demonstrate the inadequacy of our legal system. That's uncharacteristically defeatist of you, Poirot. It is realistic. Sometimes the guilty escape, sometimes the innocent suffer, and sometimes there is nothing even the greatest detective can do to change that. I have learned this lesson at considerable cost. Helena Thornwood's trial became a sensation, with newspapers across Europe following every detail of the anniversary executioner who had transformed her family home into a death trap. Public opinion was divided. Some saw her as a monster, while others viewed her as a tragic heroine driven to extremes by circumstances beyond her control. Her defense, as Japp had predicted, focused on her mental state, the trauma of losing her father, the isolation of being raised among his secrets, the corruption that had surrounded her throughout her childhood. Expert witnesses testified that Helena was not legally insane, but was suffering from a form of moral absolutism that made her incapable of distinguishing between justice and murder. The prosecution countered with the methodical nature of her crimes, the years of planning, the engineering expertise required to construct the traps, the cold calculation that had allowed her to watch 6 people die without intervening. This was not impulsive madness, they argued, but premeditated slaughter. In the end, the jury found Helena Thornwood guilty of 6 counts of murder. The judge, citing the extraordinary circumstances of the case, declined to impose the death penalty and instead sentenced her to life imprisonment with the possibility of release after 30 years. "Do you think she'll ever be released?" Miss Crane asked when Poirot visited her after the trial's conclusion. "I do not know. She is young, intelligent, and will likely behave well in prison. But the nature of her crimes, the planning, the theatrical execution, the complete lack of remorse, may convince future authorities that she remains a danger." She seemed almost relieved when the verdict came in, as though she was glad to have it over. She achieved what she wanted, not freedom, but acknowledgement. The world now knows what happened to her father, knows who was responsible, knows that they paid for their crimes. For Helena, that knowledge may be more valuable than liberty. "And you, Monsieur Poirot? What did you achieve?" The question stung because Poirot was still grappling with his own role in the tragedy. He had survived the night, had solved the mystery, had seen justice, of a sort, delivered. But he had also been forced to confront his own failure, his own complicity in the chain of events that had led to 6 deaths. "I achieved humility," he said finally. "Something I did not possess in sufficient quantity 7 years ago. I was arrogant, careless, too confident in my own abilities. I accepted easy answers because difficult answers would have required more work. And people died because of my laziness. You're being too hard on yourself. I am being accurate.
Helena Thornwood was not wrong to blame me, even if her methods of punishment were monstrous. My failure was real, and the consequences of that failure were real. I cannot change the past, but I can ensure that I never make such a failure again. Chapter 16. The Survivor's Burden. In the months following the trial, Poirot found himself haunted by the events at 47 Whitmore Gardens in ways he had not anticipated. He dreamed of the house, of the victims, of Helena Thornwood's accusing eyes as she catalogued his failures. He became more meticulous than ever in his investigations, refusing to accept conclusions that did not feel complete, pursuing evidence long after others would have considered cases closed. Miss Eleanor Crane, meanwhile, struggled to return to normal life. She had resigned from her position at the publishing house, unable to concentrate on work that seemed trivial after what she had witnessed. She moved to the countryside, seeking peace and distance from the memories that plagued her. "I keep seeing their faces," she confided to Poirot during one of his visits. "Blackwood, Templeton, Sterling, Whitfield, Mrs. Aldridge, Fletcher. I watched them die, one by one, and I did nothing to stop it." There was nothing you could do. The traps were designed to kill specific people for specific reasons. You were never the target. But why? Why was I spared when others died? I keep searching for meaning, for some reason that I deserved to survive when they didn't. There is no meaning to be found, I fear. You survived because Helena Thornwood did not consider you guilty. Your father's crimes were not your crimes, and whatever connection she believed existed between you and the conspiracy was not sufficient to warrant execution. That seems arbitrary, unjust even. Murder is always unjust, regardless of how carefully the perpetrator tries to calibrate their punishments. Helena believed she was serving justice, but she was merely serving her own need for revenge. The distinction between the guilty and the innocent was hers alone to make, and her judgment was inevitably flawed. Like all human judgment. Yes, that is why we have laws, courts, procedures, not because they are perfect, but because they are better than the alternative. When individuals take justice into their own hands, they inevitably become the very thing they sought to punish. Miss Crane considered this in silence. Do you think Helena understood that? When she was planning her revenge, did she realize she was becoming a murderer? I believe she did. I believe she accepted that transformation as the price of her justice. She was willing to become a monster in order to punish monsters. And in doing so, she proved that the line between victim and perpetrator is often thinner than we like to believe. That's a disturbing thought. It is, but it is also a necessary one. We cannot understand human nature without acknowledging its darkness, without accepting that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil when circumstances conspire to enable them. And ordinary people are also capable of extraordinary failures, like yours 7 years ago. Poirot nodded, accepting the observation without defensiveness. Exactly so. I was not evil, merely negligent. But my negligence had consequences as real as any malicious act. The distinction between active wrongdoing and passive failure can seem meaningless to those who suffer because of either. Chapter 17. Helena's Perspective. Poirot visited Helena Thornwood in prison 3 months after her conviction, seeking answers to questions that had continued to trouble him. She agreed to see him, perhaps curious about what the detective who had failed her father's case wanted to discuss. The woman who faced him across the visitors' table looked older than her years, the toll of imprisonment already visible in her pale skin and hollow eyes. But her gaze was steady, her manner composed, her defiance undiminished. "Monsieur Poirot, I wondered if you would come." "I had questions about your father, about the conspiracy, about the events that led to this tragedy." "Tragedy? Is that what you call it?" "I call it justice. Imperfect, perhaps, but more complete than anything the legal system could have provided. 6 people died because of your actions. 6 guilty people. 6 criminals who would have lived out their lives in comfort and respectability if I had done nothing." "And the 7th guest? The one who was meant to survive?" "You survived, Monsieur Poirot. That was always the plan. I didn't want to kill you. I wanted you to witness what happened, to understand the consequences of your failure, to carry the burden of that knowledge for the rest of your life. You succeeded in that, at least." "Did I? You seem burdened, yes, but also unchanged. You still believe in your precious methods, your orderly investigations, your faith that truth can always be discovered if one looks hard enough." "I believe those things more than ever. What I no longer believe is that I am infallible, that my methods guarantee success, that my conclusions are beyond question. Your actions taught me humility, mademoiselle, even as they taught me horror." Helena laughed, a bitter sound that held no amusement. "Then perhaps some good came from this after all. The great Hercule Poirot, humbled by a 24-year-old woman with a grudge and an engineering degree." "You minimize your own accomplishments. The planning required to orchestrate that night, the engineering skill to create those traps, the psychological insight to manipulate each victim into their death. These were remarkable achievements, however monstrous their purpose." "My father would have been proud. He always said that knowledge was power, that understanding people's weaknesses was the key to controlling them. I used his own techniques against the people who killed him." "You became him?" "No. I became something worse. He used his knowledge for profit. I used mine for death. He kept his victims alive to continue extracting value. I killed mine to end their existence entirely. If there is a hierarchy of evil, I have surpassed my father." "And you feel no remorse?" "I feel satisfaction, mixed with exhaustion and something that might be regret. Not for what I did, but for what I became in doing it. I was a promising engineering student once, with a future full of possibility. Now I am a convicted murderer who will spend decades in this cell." "Was it worth it?" "Ask me in 30 years, when I'm eligible for parole. Perhaps by then, I will have an answer." Chapter 18. The Legacy of That Night. The events at 47 Whitmore Gardens became a famous case, studied in law schools and psychology departments, analysed in countless articles and books. The anniversary executioner became a symbol of the dangers of vigilante justice, a cautionary tale about what happens when grief and intelligence combine with opportunity and motive. But for Hercule Poirot, the case remained personal in ways that no academic analysis could capture. He had been a participant, a target, a witness, and in some sense, a cause of the tragedy that unfolded that night. His subsequent career showed the effects of that experience. He became more thorough, more skeptical, more willing to question his own conclusions. He took on fewer cases, focusing his attention on those that required the deepest investigation, the most careful analysis. He no longer accepted easy answers or comfortable explanations. "You've changed," Inspector Japp observed one evening, years after the events at Whitmore Gardens. "You used to be so confident, so certain of your abilities. Now you second-guess everything." I was too confident before. That confidence led me to accept a conclusion that protected murderers and created the conditions for 6 more deaths. I cannot afford such confidence again. But you're still the best detective I know. Your record since that case has been flawless. Because I work harder now, question deeper, refuse to rest until I am certain, truly certain, that I have found the truth. The price of that certainty is constant doubt, constant vigilance, constant awareness that I might be wrong. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it is also necessary. Helena Thornwood taught me that my failures have consequences, that people die when I am careless. I cannot prevent all deaths, cannot solve all crimes, cannot guarantee justice in every case. But I can ensure that my own negligence does not add to the world's suffering. Miss Eleanor Crane eventually found a measure of peace, rebuilding her life in a small village far from London's memories. She married a local schoolteacher, had children, created a life that was ordinary in all the ways she had once considered boring. "I used to want excitement," she told Poirot during what would be their final meeting. "Adventure, mystery, the thrill of the unexpected." That night cured me of such desires forever. There is nothing wrong with an ordinary life. No, there is something precious about it, actually. Something I didn't appreciate until I saw how easily life could be taken away. Helena Thornwood served 18 years of her sentence before being released on parole. She emerged into a world that had largely forgotten her. Her notoriety faded into the archives of true crime history. She changed her name, moved abroad, and disappeared from public view entirely. Whether she found peace or continued to be haunted by what she had done, no one knew. She never contacted Poirot, never gave interviews, never wrote the memoir that publishers had offered fortunes to acquire. She simply vanished, as her victims had vanished into death, leaving behind only questions that would never be answered. "The 7th guest dies at dawn," Poirot murmured sometimes, remembering the words that had drawn 7 strangers together on that terrible night. But it was the other 6 who died, and the 7th who was left to carry the burden of survival. "Is that worse?" Captain Hastings asked when Poirot shared this reflection. "Dying, or surviving to remember?" "That, mon ami, is a question I hope never to answer definitively. But I suspect that both have their costs, and neither offers escape from the fundamental tragedy of human existence. The knowledge that we are all, in some sense, both guilty and innocent, both victims and perpetrators, both the 7th guest and the 6 who fall." Chapter 19. Poirot's Reflection. Years later, in the quiet of his London apartment, Hercule Poirot would sometimes think about the night at 47 Whitmore Gardens, about the 7 strangers brought together by mysterious telegrams, about the deaths that followed one by one, about the young woman who had transformed herself into an instrument of justice. He would think about his own role in the tragedy, the consultation he had performed carelessly, the report he had written hastily, the murderers he had allowed to escape through his negligence. He would wonder if things could have been different, if he had been more thorough, more skeptical, more true to the principles he claimed to embody. And he would remember the faces of the dead. Herbert Blackwood, whose crime remained unclear, but whose death was no less real for its mystery. Vera Templeton, who had poisoned a man and carried that guilt until it killed her. Richard Sterling, whose military honours concealed atrocities that would never be acknowledged. James Whitfield, who had sold his medical integrity for threats and promises. Constance Aldridge, whose husband's sins had become her inheritance. Simon Fletcher, who had helped a killer plan her revenge without understanding what she intended. 6 deaths, each one a story, each one a tragedy, each one a consequence of choices made long before that fatal night. The past is never truly past, Poirot would say to those who asked about the case. It lives on in the present, shaping our choices, determining our fates. Marcus Thornwood died 7 years before his victims, but his death was the cause of theirs. And my failure, 7 years before that night, was the cause of everything that followed.
You blame yourself too much, Hastings would respond. You couldn't have known what Helena would do.
I could have known that my negligence would have consequences. Every action we take, every decision we make, creates ripples that spread outward into the future. When we are careless, those ripples can become waves. Waves that drown the innocent, along with the guilty.
A heavy philosophy.
A necessary one. We cannot control the future, Hastings, but we can control our present actions. We can be thorough when thoroughness is required, honest when honesty is demanded, vigilant when vigilance might save lives. We cannot guarantee justice, but we can ensure that our own failures do not add to injustice.
And when we fail, despite our best efforts?
Then we accept the failure,
learn from it, and try to do better.
That is all any of us can do. Our best, with the knowledge that our best is never perfect, never complete, never sufficient to address all the darkness in the world. The 7th guest dies at dawn. It was a phrase that had haunted Poirot for years, a reminder of the night when 6 people died and 1 survived, when justice and murder became indistinguishable, when the great detective discovered that even his renowned grey cells could fail him. But it was also, in its strange way, a source of strength. The knowledge of that failure drove Poirot to greater heights, forced him to question assumptions he had once accepted without thought, made him the detective he was meant to be, rather than the detective he had comfortably become. Helena Thornwood had wanted to punish him, to burden him with guilt and doubt for the rest of his days. In this, she had partly succeeded, but she had also, inadvertently, given him a gift. The gift of humility, of awareness, of understanding that even the greatest minds can fail and must therefore work constantly to avoid failure. This 7th guest survived, Poirot would conclude when telling the story. But in surviving, he was transformed. He emerged from that house a different man. Wiser, perhaps, but also sadder, knowing that his wisdom had been purchased at a terrible price.
Is that the lesson of the story? Hastings would ask. That wisdom costs suffering?
The lesson, mon ami, is that we are all connected, victims and criminals, innocents and guilty, the living and the dead. Our actions affect others in ways we cannot predict,
And our failures have consequences we cannot escape. The seventh guest dies at dawn. Not physically, perhaps, but in some deeper sense. The person who enters that house is not the person who emerges. And that transformation is both the punishment and the salvation. Thank you for joining us on The Little Grey Cells for The Seventh Guest Dies at Dawn. If this tale of mysterious summons, deadly traps, vengeful daughters, and the long shadow of past crimes captured your imagination tonight, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you suspect Helena Thornwood before her identity was revealed? Or were you focused on the 7 guests themselves as potential killers? What did you think of Poirot's confession of professional failure? Was he right to blame himself for the tragic events that followed his negligent investigation 7 years earlier? Or was Helena's vendetta her own moral responsibility, regardless of what the detective had done? And the number 7 that echoed throughout the tale, the 7 guests, the 7 years of waiting, the 7 sins that led to murder and conspiracy. What significance did that haunting pattern hold for you as you followed the story to its dark conclusion? These are questions worth pondering as you reflect on tonight's mystery. We love hearing from fellow mystery enthusiasts around the world, and your engagement helps us bring more tales of the little Belgian detective to life. Until next time, keep those grey cells active and thoroughly well exercised. Remember that our failures can have consequences as profound and far-reaching as our successes. And trust that truth, even uncomfortable truth about ourselves and our own shortcomings, is always better than the comfortable lies we tell to avoid facing our own limitations and mistakes. The 7th guest survived to see the dawn break over London's rooftops. But the dawn brought no comfort, only the cold, clear light of self-knowledge and the long burden of memory that would follow them for the rest of their days. Farewell, dear listeners, and may your own encounters with darkness leave you wiser rather than broken, transformed rather than diminished, ready to face whatever the next dawn may bring with courage, humility, and the determination to do better than you have done before.